Thank you for clicking on my story today. My name is Patricia, and I'm 67 years old. What I'm about to tell you happened just 8 months ago, and it still makes my hands shake when I think about it. This is the story of how a cup of hot chocolate nearly ended my life, and how my husband's own sister saved me without even knowing it. I met Robert when I was 29 years old. He was a young architect, ambitious and charming, with the kind of smile that made you feel like you were the only person in the room. We married within a year, and for the next 38 years, I thought I knew everything about him. I thought I knew what love looked like. I was wrong. Our life together was comfortable. We lived in a 3-bedroom colonial in Westchester County, the kind of house with a white picket fence and rose bushes that I tended every spring. Robert's firm had done well over the years. We weren't wealthy, but we were secure. We had enough for retirement, enough for the occasional vacation, enough to help our daughter Amanda through college and her wedding. The problems started so quietly that I almost didn't notice them. It began about 18 months ago. Robert started working later. Not every night, just once or twice a week at first, then 3 times, then 4. He'd come home after I'd already eaten dinner, smelling of cologne I didn't recognize, claiming he'd grabbed food at the office. "Is everything all right at work?" I asked him one evening in June, trying to keep my voice light. Robert looked up from his phone, and for just a second, something flickered across his face. Annoyance, maybe. Or guilt. "Everything's fine, Patricia. We're just busy with the Henderson project. You know how it is." But I didn't know how it was anymore. Robert had always come home for dinner, even during busy seasons. He'd always made time for us. I tried to ignore the unease growing in my chest. I told myself I was being paranoid, that marriage goes through phases, that after 38 years together, a little distance was normal. Then came the financial questions. One Saturday morning in September, Robert sat down at the kitchen table while I was making coffee. He had a stack of papers in front of him, forms and documents I didn't recognize. "Patricia, we need to talk about our finances," he said, not looking at me. I turned from the coffee maker, surprised. Robert had always handled our money. I'd trusted him with it completely. "What about them?" I asked. "I think we should consolidate our accounts. Move everything into one checking account for simplicity, and I've been thinking about life insurance. We should increase your policy. You're getting older. And if something happened to you, the funeral costs alone." He trailed off, but his eyes were fixed on the papers with an intensity that made something cold settle in my stomach. "How much exactly would the policy be?" I asked carefully. $500,000. It's reasonable for someone your age. $500,000 for my funeral. I signed the papers. I don't know why. Maybe because questioning your husband of 38 years feels like admitting your marriage is a lie. Maybe because I wanted to believe everything was fine. But I started watching him more closely after that. I noticed how he angled his phone away from me when he texted. I noticed how he'd started going to the gym 3 times a week, something he'd never done before. I noticed the new clothes, the hair dye to cover his gray, the expensive watch I'd never seen before. "Where did you get that watch?" I asked one evening. Robert glanced at his wrist, as if he'd forgotten he was wearing it. "A bonus from the firm. The Henderson project closed." I nodded, but something didn't sit right. Robert's firm was successful, but they didn't give Rolex bonuses. Then, in October, Robert's sister Caroline called. "Patricia," she said, her voice tight with emotion, "I need to talk to you about something. Can I come over tomorrow? When Robert's at work?" Caroline had never liked me much. She was 10 years younger than Robert, never married, fiercely independent and protective of her brother. For her to reach out to me directly was unusual. "Of course," I said. "Is something wrong? I'd rather talk in person." She came over the next afternoon, a Tuesday. I made tea, and we sat in the living room, the autumn sun streaming through the windows. "Patricia," Caroline started, her hands wrapped around her teacup. "I don't know how to say this, so I'm just going to say it. Has Robert been acting strange lately?" My heart started racing. "Yes," I admitted. "He has." Caroline took a deep breath. "I think he's having an affair. I saw him last week at a restaurant in Manhattan with a woman. She was young, maybe 30. They were holding hands. The room seemed to tilt. I gripped my own teacup, feeling the heat burn my palms. "Are you sure?" I whispered. "I'm sure. I almost went over to their table, but then I thought you should know first. I'm so sorry, Patricia. After Caroline left, I sat in that living room for 3 hours, watching the sun set, trying to process what I'd learned. Part of me wanted to confront Robert immediately. Part of me wanted to pretend I'd never heard it. That evening, Robert came home early for the first time in weeks. "I made your favorite," he said, holding up a bag from the Italian restaurant where we'd had our first date. "Thought we could have a nice dinner together." I should have been happy. Instead, I felt sick. We ate in near silence. Robert kept checking his phone. I kept watching his face, trying to see the man I'd married, trying to find any trace of the love I thought we'd shared. After dinner, Robert went to his study. I cleaned up the kitchen, my mind spinning. I need proof, I thought. Before I accuse him of anything, I need proof. Over the next few weeks, I became someone I didn't recognize. I checked his phone when he was in the shower. I went through his coat pockets. I even drove by his office one evening to see if his car was really there. It wasn't. I followed the GPS on our shared phone plan and found him at an apartment building in Stamford, Connecticut. A young woman answered the door when I knocked, wearing Robert's shirt. "Can I help you?" she asked, her face confused. "I'm Patricia, Robert's wife." The color drained from her face. "Wife," she repeated. "He told me he was divorced." I didn't confront Robert that night. Instead, I went home and I planned. I called a divorce attorney. I started gathering financial documents. I opened a separate bank account and began transferring small amounts of money each week. And that's when Robert started making me hot chocolate. It was a Tuesday evening in late November, unusually cold for that time of year. I'd just come in from the garden, where I'd been covering the rose bushes for winter. My hands were numb, my nose red from the cold. "You look frozen, sweetheart," Robert said, smiling at me from the kitchen. "Sit down, I'll make you some hot chocolate." I stared at him. Robert never made me anything. In 38 years of marriage, I could count on one hand the number of times he'd cooked for me. "That's all right," I said. "I can make it myself." No, I insist. "You work so hard in that garden. Let me take care of you." He was already pulling out the cocoa powder, the milk, the small saucepan we used for heating things. He moved around the kitchen with unusual confidence, like he'd practiced. I sat at the kitchen table and watched him. Something was wrong. Everything about this was wrong. Robert hummed while he worked, some tune I didn't recognize. He poured the hot chocolate into my favorite mug, the blue one with sunflowers that Amanda had given me years ago. "Here you go," he said, setting it in front of me with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Drink up before it gets cold." I looked down at the mug. Steam rose from the surface, carrying the rich scent of chocolate. It looked perfect. It smelled perfect. But something made me hesitate. "Thank you," I said, wrapping my hands around the mug for warmth but not drinking. Robert stood there, watching me, waiting. "Aren't you going to try it?" he asked. "In a minute. It's too hot right now." His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Right," he said. "Of course. I'll be in my study if you need me." He left the kitchen, but I heard his footsteps stop in the hallway. He was listening. I looked down at the hot chocolate again. My instincts were screaming at me. Something was very, very wrong. I stood up, walked to the sink, and poured the entire mug down the drain. That's when I heard the doorbell ring. I went to answer it, my heart still pounding. It was Caroline. She was holding a casserole dish, her face apologetic. "I'm so sorry to drop by unannounced," she said. "I made too much chicken pot pie and thought you and Robert might want some for dinner tomorrow." "Come in," I said, relief flooding through me. "Please, come in." Caroline stepped inside, setting the casserole on the hallway table. She started to unwind her scarf when Robert emerged from his study, his face pale. "Caroline," he said, "what are you doing here?" "I brought dinner," she said, confused by his tone. "Is that all right?" Of course," he said, but his voice was strange, high-pitched, stressed. "I just made Patricia some hot chocolate," Robert continued. "Would you like some?" "Oh, that sounds lovely," Caroline said. "It's freezing out there." Before I could say anything, Robert was already in the kitchen, already making another mug. He worked quickly, efficiently, his hands shaking slightly. He brought it out and handed it to Caroline. "Here you go," he said, "fresh and hot. Caroline took the mug, smiling. "You're so thoughtful, Robert. Patricia, did you drink yours?" "I was just about to." I lied, not understanding why I was lying, just knowing I should. Caroline raised the mug to her lips and took a long sip. This is delicious. What did you put in it?" Robert's face had gone completely white. "Just cocoa and milk," he said, "and a little vanilla." Caroline took another sip, then another. And then she stopped. Her hand went to her throat. The mug slipped from her fingers and shattered on the hardwood floor, hot chocolate splashing everywhere. "Caroline!" I screamed, rushing to her. She was trying to speak, but nothing was coming out. Her eyes were wide, terrified. She clutched at her chest, her face turning red, then purple. "Call 911!" I shouted at Robert. But Robert wasn't moving. He was standing there, frozen, staring at his sister with an expression I'd never seen before. Pure, absolute horror. "Robert!" I screamed again. "Call 911!" He finally moved, fumbling for his phone, but his hands were shaking so badly he dropped it. I grabbed my own phone and called. I stayed on the line while I held Caroline, watching her struggle to breathe, watching her eyes start to roll back. The ambulance arrived 7 minutes later. They rushed Caroline to Westchester Medical Center. I rode with her in the ambulance while Robert followed in his car. At the hospital, they pumped her stomach. They ran tests. They asked questions. "What did she ingest?" the doctor asked me. "I don't know," I said. "She just had some hot chocolate my husband made." The doctor's expression changed. "Do you still have the hot chocolate?" "I think so. It spilled on our floor." "Don't clean it up," the doctor said. "The police will need to test it." "Police?" I repeated. "Why would the police need to test it?" "Because," the doctor said carefully, "your sister-in-law has been poisoned. We found traces of antifreeze in her system." The world stopped. Antifreeze. Someone had put antifreeze in the hot chocolate. The hot chocolate Robert had made. The hot chocolate he'd insisted I drink. The hot chocolate I'd poured down the sink. I'm not sure how long I stood there in that hospital corridor, trying to process what I'd just heard. Time seemed to move differently, like I was watching everything happen from very far away. Caroline survived, but just barely. She was in the ICU for 4 days. The doctors said if she'd drunk more of the hot chocolate, if the ambulance had taken even 5 minutes longer, she would have died. She should have been me. The police came to the house that night. They collected the broken mug, the spilled hot chocolate from the floor, the saucepan Robert had used. They asked Robert to come to the station for questioning. "I should tell you something," I said to the detective, a woman named Martinez, who had kind eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor. "Robert made me hot chocolate too, right before his sister arrived. I poured it down the sink because something felt wrong." Detective Martinez's eyes sharpened. "Do you know why you felt that way?" I told her everything. The affair, the life insurance policy, the late nights, the financial consolidation, the way he'd watched me, waiting for me to drink. "We need to check your pipes," she said. They found it in the drain trap. Traces of the same antifreeze that had nearly killed Caroline. Robert was arrested that night. In his study, police found Google searches dating back 3 months. How much antifreeze is lethal? Symptoms of antifreeze poisoning. How long does antifreeze take to kill? Life insurance payout after death. Can life insurance deny payout for accidental death? They also found love letters, emails, text messages. Robert had been planning to leave me for his girlfriend, a 32-year-old paralegal named Jennifer who worked at a law firm in Stamford, but he didn't want to give up half his assets in a divorce. He didn't want to lose the house, the retirement accounts, the life we'd built together. He wanted it all. So he'd taken out a life insurance policy on me, increased it to $500,000, and planned to kill me. Make it look like an accident. Grieve appropriately. Cash in the policy. Start his new life with Jennifer and plenty of money. But Caroline had showed up at the wrong moment. Or the right moment, depending on how you looked at it. The trial lasted 3 weeks. Robert's lawyer tried to claim it was all a misunderstanding, that the antifreeze had somehow contaminated the cocoa powder accidentally. But the prosecution had the Google searches. They had the affair. They had the life insurance policy. They had Robert's own sister, who testified from her wheelchair about nearly dying in her brother's place. Robert was sentenced to 25 years for attempted murder. Jennifer, his girlfriend, testified against him. She claimed she knew nothing about the murder plot, and the prosecutors believed her. She was young and naive and in love with a man who'd lied to her about everything. I divorced Robert while he awaited trial. The house, the assets, everything went to me. I didn't want any of it. The whole thing felt tainted, poisoned like that hot chocolate. I sold the house in Westchester and moved to a small cottage in Vermont, near where my daughter Amanda lives with her family. The rose bushes are gone, but I have a new garden now, wildflowers and herbs and vegetables that I grow myself. Caroline recovered, mostly. She has some kidney damage that will never fully heal, but she's alive. She visits me once a month, and we drink tea together, never hot chocolate. Neither of us can stomach it anymore. Sometimes, late at night, I think about how close I came. If Caroline hadn't shown up when she did, if I'd drunk that hot chocolate, I'd be dead. Robert would be free, living his new life with Jennifer, spending my life insurance money. But I survived because I paid attention to the small things. The way he watched me, the forced smile, the insistence that I drink something he'd made, when in 38 years he'd never made me anything. I survived because I trusted my instincts, even when I couldn't explain them. I survived because sometimes the people we love most are the ones we should fear. I'm 67 years old now, and I'm starting over. I have my daughter, my grandchildren, my garden. I have Caroline, who saved my life without meaning to. I have peace, finally, in this small cottage with its bright kitchen and the mountains visible from every window. And I make my own hot chocolate now. I know exactly what's in it. People ask me sometimes if I'm angry, if I hate Robert for what he tried to do. The truth is, I don't feel much of anything for him anymore. He's a stranger to me now, someone I thought I knew but never really did. What I feel mostly is grateful. Grateful that I noticed. Grateful that I listened to that voice in my head that said something's wrong. Grateful that I poured that hot chocolate down the sink. Grateful that I'm still here to tell this story. If you're watching this and something feels wrong in your relationship, if your partner is acting strange, if your instincts are screaming at you, please listen. Don't ignore it because you've been together for years. Don't ignore it because you don't want to seem paranoid. Don't ignore it because love is supposed to mean trust. Trust yourself first. That's what saved my life. Not luck, not fate. Just paying attention and trusting that the small voice in my head that said don't drink this deserved to be heard. Caroline and I were talking about this last week over tea. She asked me if I ever regretted not seeing the signs earlier, not leaving Robert before it got to that point. I told her the truth. I can't regret the life I lived, even if it ended in betrayal. I had good years with Robert. I raised my daughter in that house. I planted those rose bushes and watched them bloom every spring. Those years were real, even if Robert's love wasn't. But I also told her this. I won't waste another moment of my life on regret. I'm here. I'm alive. I'm free. And that's more than Robert planned for me to have. Now I drink my tea, the tea I make myself, and I watch the mountains change with the seasons. I tend my garden and play with my grandchildren and visit with my daughter. I've joined a book club in town. I'm learning to paint. I'm living the life Robert tried to take from me, and I'm living it on my own terms. That's the best revenge I could ask for. Thank you for listening to my story. If it helps even one person trust their instincts, if it saves even one life, then sharing it was worth it. Stay safe out there. Pay attention. Trust yourself. And always, always make your own hot chocolate.